There we go. I've got two images for you here that I think are metaphorical of different types of economics. On the left is Giardia, which is a parasite that lives on you. It sucks the life out of you. It gives you diarrhea. You get it from tainted water, and it is very, very hard to get rid of. It is. Oh, is that? Holy crap! Yeah. So, I've been talking a lot about parasitic types of finance. There's a lot of problems we've seen since 2008. And one of the biggest examples kind of bit me in the butt this past December when I started writing about Guitar Center's recent financial trouble. And I'm a musician. I normally don't think much about the musical instrument sector, but I heard from a friend that Guitar Center had gone to junk bond status, and I wrote about it in an article. Now, it's only about a $7 billion industry. It's about the size of the mattress industry. So it just never really, this is me playing the Crew Rider family band. This is normally where I intersect with the industry. But I wrote this thing called Guitar Center and the End of Big Box Retail, and 150,000 people came to my blog in 5 days. And I touched this nerve because I found out that Standard & Poor's had cut the Bain Capital-owned Guitar Center Holdings, Inc. paper down to CCC plus from B minus, which is junk bond status. And I started to learn about how we took this company that originally was on the corner of Pico and I forget, in West Hollywood. They were originally Organ Center, that became Guitar Center after the Beatles hit America, and they were this local player. And they were growing quite organically. And then some heavier types of finance got involved. And things took a different turn. Now you have a venture capital firm called Weston Presidio that invests in all these different organizations. Investment, not by its nature necessarily a bad thing. Capital formation, not a bad thing. But these guys got involved with Guitar Center back around 2000 and started with the plan to take them public. Not a bad idea. Retail was going great, and you had a certain thing going on in the consumer spending sector where we had this big housing bubble going on, and finance elsewhere in the ecosystem was getting the wages aren't going anywhere, but we're getting all this spare capitals flowing into the whole system, and retail is a great place to put it. So the Guitar Center thing, I couldn't find a picture of them ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, but they got public in 2002. So somewhere in about 2 or 3 years, this private equity firm gets a lot of new capital in, they grow. It's all seeming kind of organic, and things are going well because we're getting out of a certain recession. Up until about 2007, another private equity firm called Bain Capital came to national prominence when this guy in the center, Mitt Romney, ran for president, and people started talking about what kind of finance they did. These guys have a very similar playbook, but they took these guys from public back to private with the idea of doing it again. We're going to make it even bigger. But see, life is a timed adventure. So these guys stacked a whole ton of debt to be sort of out here in 2017 with the idea of we're going to take them in, pack them full of debt, make them even bigger, and start to dominate the market. And then we'll be out, we'll take it back public, and that's where we get our payout. Now, the competitive strategy here, there's only one type of organism that wants to be growing all the time. That's a cancer cell. So, but normally what size gets you in the marketplace when you are a dominator, and they have $2 billion out of the $7 billion in the industry, is that you can begin to have your way with vendors and employees and competitors. And there's really a systemic effect here. There's not necessarily a growing market, but you can start to extract more rent out of that industry. Because remember, if you're going from 2007 to 2017, in 2008 we had a bit of a blow up. Now, nature does not always like big things. Yeah, I'm 40, I'm from the Star Wars generation, so we're going to talk about somebody big getting taken down by the little people. You have the Ewoks taking down the forest walkers from Star Wars. I've arrived at this place in my life. I can now use this as a business metaphor. But Guitar Center's had a lot of problems recently, and to avoid going bankrupt here, they just handed off to another firm that owned the most of their debt. And there's a lot of indication that it's kind of the end of the road, and these guys are probably stripping the place for parts. And I've spoken, as a result of my writing, I've spoken to just dozens and dozens of people all over the industry that talk about the impact of this. Well, so the new guys are in, and they're pushing their debt out to 2020. But most of the debt is going to be either subprime or completely junk, and we're at a record, almost to the record for last year, for junk bonds. We haven't seen this kind of activity since the 80s. So basically, my question is how do we get back to something that is healthy and doesn't just take all the money in an industry with the goal of paying off a handful of financiers? I've talked to just dozens and dozens of people in the music industry, and they all are in it for the love of the art. They're all in it for their communities. This is Dave Hinson. He runs Killer Vintage, up in South City, St. Louis. That's him with Les Paul here. Dave's a great guy. He has forgotten more about Guitar Since Breakfast than you'll ever know. And he employs guys. I know his employees. He carries some vintage stuff. He carries local manufacturers, specializes in this. This is Reverb. I talked to these guys yesterday. They're up in Chicago Music Exchange. It doesn't have to be a local retailer. This guy, the guy who started Reverb, he's like, I know that there's billions of dollars of capital in people's closets. I want to give them a fair shake for it. I want to give them fair price instead of just taking 30% off the top. I talked to a guy named George Grexa who's restarting the acoustic bass amp line. He says it's the greatest bass amp in the world. It's harder to get in when you have an ecosystem that is dominated by one player. I've spoken to lots of entrepreneurs that say it's pretty hard when you've got to grow your dream when you're in that kind of environment. So the question is for all of us, what do we want out of finance? What do we want out of investment? And where are we going? What are we trying to create? Do we mind tolerating parasitic behavior? Or are we trying to grow something that affects more than just the numbers on the balance sheet?
All right.